To figure out this paradox, we have to talk about the rate gap. This is the main culprit behind our mystery, and it's essentially created a holding pattern that's keeping the entire market captive. In simple terms, this gap represents a severe, real-world financial penalty a homeowner faces if they decide to move. Imagine you currently have a historically low fixed interest rate on your home, say around 3%. Well, if you want to move, you got to give that up and take on a new mortgage at the current market rate, which might be hovering around 7%. So if you trade that 3% mortgage for a 7% mortgage on a house of the exact same price, your monthly payment could effectively double just for moving across the street. That penalty right there, that's the rate gap.
And you can see how suddenly this shock hit the system. Current homeowners were cruising along, paying those nice low median interest rates. But then, in 2022, market rates skyrocketed over 300 basis points in a remarkably short period. They blew right past those existing fixed rates and pushed current borrowers completely out of the money. It's basically a trap snapping shut.
And because of this sudden shift, homeowners are faced with an almost impossible choice. Do you move, surrender your low-rate safety net, and take on sky-high borrowing costs for the foreseeable future? The financial math of moving simply doesn't make sense anymore for everyday Americans. So instead of upgrading or downsizing when life happens, they're forced to choose between staying put in a house they might have completely outgrown or moving and getting hit with a massive financial penalty. It's really fascinating how this kitchen table dilemma translates directly into hard economic data. There's this quote from the Federal Housing Finance Agency that hits the nail on the head. They note that the lock-in effect is not merely a psychological barrier, it is a mathematical trap. This isn't just about people being stubborn or emotionally attached to their living rooms. They are fundamentally, mathematically chained to their current properties by the terms of their original mortgage.
Let's actually put a real number on that trap, just to put things into perspective. For every single percentage point that the market rate exceeds a homeowner's original fixed rate, the probability of them selling their property drops by 18.1%. Let's do the math on that. If you have a 3% mortgage and market rates hit 7%, that's a 4-point gap. 4 times 18 means you are over 70% less likely to move. That is an unbelievable level of sensitivity dictating human behavior.
When you apply that massive drop in probability across tens of millions of homeowners in the U.S., the entire real estate ecosystem simply grinds to a halt. The data paints a picture of total market paralysis. Homeowner mobility plummeted in perfect lockstep with the falling rate gap. As that gap plunged into negative territory, mobility completely collapsed. This essentially froze local housing churn overnight. You stop seeing neighbors moving down the street, young couples upgrading to larger homes, or older folks downsizing for retirement.
Ultimately, this mathematical trap resulted in a devastating 57% reduction in home sales among folks with fixed-rate mortgages by the final quarter of 2023. Think about that. More than half of the normally expected sales from this massive demographic simply vanished into thin air. It is a stunning drop in baseline economic activity.
To put that percentage into sheer volume, we are talking about a staggering 1.33 million prevented home sales. Literally, 1.33 million transactions wiped off the map between mid-2022 and the end of 2023. That's growing families who couldn't upgrade, empty nesters unable to downsize, and workers actually turning down new jobs because they simply could not afford to relocate.
This total freeze has completely broken the normal cycle of real estate. The housing market needs churn to function. People selling old homes to buy new ones. But with owners locked in, the shelves are practically bare. Researchers found that 44% of the total mobility drop is tied directly to these rate gaps, causing a massive reduction in local moves. And because nobody's leaving their homes, the broader market has tightened drastically. The time homes spent on the market has been slashed by 29%. So when a house does finally get listed, it sparks absolutely ruthless buyer competition for whatever meager inventory is left.
And here is the crazy twist that answers our initial paradox. This absolute lack of supply artificially forced home prices 5.7% higher. The sheer scarcity of homes for sale totally overpowered the typical rule of economics where high interest rates lower prices. Because inventory was choked off by the lock-in effect, desperate buyers bid up the few homes available, driving prices up instead of down.
As we survey the wreckage of this economic freeze, we really have to look beyond the numbers to understand the human cost. Today, there are nearly 50 million active mortgages in the U.S. locked in at these historically low fixed rates. Because of this, Americans, especially those with lower wealth accumulation, are trapped in homes they don't necessarily want or that just don't fit their needs anymore. They can't strategically time their sales, they can't relocate for better jobs, and they are effectively blocked from moving up the housing ladder. It's this quiet, structural barrier that's worsening economic mobility across the board.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, you really have to wonder, how long can the housing market survive being held hostage by a mathematical trap? If borrowing rates stay high, are we going to see an entire generation of homeowners permanently frozen in place? When, or even if, will this unprecedented market paralysis finally break so housing churn can resume its natural flow? It's a fascinating, honestly kind of scary question for the future of our economy, and it affects almost every community out there. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this, and definitely keep your eye on those rate gaps.